Okay, so just logistics first. I just started the recording, so as usual, this will be available in recorded form on YouTube, sometime next week. An email will go out to everyone who's registered with the link to it. So, if anybody has a colleague that wants to watch it, you can always catch it on the video. Let me introduce myself, as I usually do. My name is David Fass. I'm the trainer at iNetSoft, and we do these monthly training webinars focusing on particular topics. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, and hopefully everyone can hear me. I cannot hear you, and that's by design. You're all muted, so I can't hear you if you're trying to talk to me. So don't exhaust yourself trying to talk to me. However, you can type in the chat box or the question box, whatever you have there, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go along. So somebody already gave me a radio check, so I'm pretty sure that most of you can hear me and see me, but or not see me, see my screen. If anybody is having difficulty seeing the webinar or hearing me or anything like that, please type in the chat box, let me know, and I'll see what I can do to adjust things. Pardon me. Okay, so let's get started. So hopefully you can all see the slide on the screen. Today's topic is adding script to a dashboard. And I feel, as I was preparing this webinar, I had the feeling that some of these things we've covered before in previous webinars, which is not that surprising because we've already done 2+ years of these webinars. So I have a feeling in at least a couple of instances we've touched on some of these topics, but hopefully there'll be something new here. So let's get started. Again, feel free to type questions in the chat box if you have a question about something. So I have an example that I'll bring up. I have Visual Composer open over here. And, so take a moment to digest this. It's a little bit, I kind of overloaded this dashboard because I want to show you a few different examples of scripting. I don't know that we'll get to everything that I kind of sketched out here, but just a quick run through of what's going on here. There's a chart you can see here, and there's a couple of crosstabs here and here. There's nothing that exceptional about any of. I mean, it's just a basic, basic chart, basic crosstabs. So, if anybody has questions about, how did I make this chart? How did I make that crosstab? I would recommend, go back and look at the previous webinars on YouTube, and there's definitely going to be, we've definitely done a webinar on, making charts, making crosstabs, I'm sure. As bad as my memory is, I'm sure we've covered that. So anyway, so don't get too hung up on what the chart looks like and things like that. What I want to do here is I want to give the user some level of control over the way that they experience this dashboard. First of all, I want the user to be able to choose the measure that's displayed on the chart, and you can see right now the chart is just displaying the aggregated total category by category. I want the user to be able to choose whether they see the total or the quantity or the average discount. Right, so I put this radio button here. Right now it doesn't do anything. And again, adding a radio button like this is pretty simple. I skipped over that because I didn't want to take the time. But again, it's just there's a component called a radio button over here, and you can add it, and you can add labels and values and so on. So again, I'm sure we've covered that in a previous webinar, so I'm not going to get too bogged down in that. Also, I want the user to be able to specify whether they see this chart over here or the table below it, right? So although I've set this up where you can see both of them, if you look a little closer, you'll notice that they both display the same information, right? So the chart, it breaks out by category and by year. The crosstab below breaks out by category and by year. It's the same information, just tabular form versus graphical form. And so there's no real need to have both of these available simultaneously. So so that's why I'm going to give the user a choice. Which one do they want to see? And that way I can save some room on the dashboard by showing just one of them. And then up at the top over here, over here we've got an option to choose the year. I want the user to be able to choose what year they see in the chart, 2014, 2015, 2016, or all the years. right? Now, as we'll see shortly, there's a lot of different ways that I can give a user a choice like this. This is just one particular approach, but we'll see that if I choose to do it this way, it will require some scripting to get it to work. So that's another thing. And then up at the top, I've got a couple of text elements, welcome back, comma, and generated on, colon. Right, and so what I want to do here is I want to put the user's name, right? So I want this to say something like welcome back, David, in my case, if I were the person logging in. And over here, I want it to say something like generated on March, whatever it is, 18th. What is it? Yeah, March 18th, 2016. Right. And so both of those things I'm going to handle using script as well, because obviously I can't hard code these things. Right. I need these to be generated. Both the name of the user and the date. I need to be generated dynamically at the time that the user actually views the dashboard, because as the designer, I don't know, at a given time, who's going to be using that dashboard. Could be anyone. Anyone who has permission to open the dashboard could be opening the dashboard, and they could do that at any time. So I can't set those things up. I can't hard code those things now. And then down at the bottom here, I've got this table here, and I have a text element here, and I want the text element to say top customer is whoever the top company is in this list. This table is sorted by quantity, right? So if I open up the editor, if I open up the crosstab editor and I click on company, you can see that it's sorted by value descending. Right, I clicked on the company. This is the crosstab editor, right? And it's sorted by value descending according to quantity purchased, right? So basically whatever company is listed here in the top spot, I want this to say top customer is, and then that company name. And again, I can do that with a little script. And then finally, there's a highlight on this crosstab. It basically highlights values of percent unpaid. This is the percentage of unpaid orders that are above 15%. So if a given company has more than 15% unpaid orders, then that value gets highlighted. That's not script. That's just a simple highlight, right? So if I right-click on that and select highlight, you can see I set that up just as a basic highlight. I assume we've covered that previously, but anyway, it's not that complicated. So any value here that exceeds 15% gets highlighted in red. But the part that I do want to script is down here below the table. I've got this text element that says alert excessive unpaid orders. Now, obviously, I only want to display that if in fact there is an excess of unpaid orders. Right now you may ask why. Why wouldn't there be? Because obviously, this is the data I'm looking at, and you can see that there are a few companies that have excessive unpaid orders, which is, what the label that I'm giving to percent unpaid larger than 15%. I'm calling that excessive unpaid, right? There is, of course, but obviously that could change over time, right? So, 3 years from now, you might look at this table and the data in there might be, there might be nobody with excessive unpaid orders. Or I've got this selection list here, and if I select a particular state, like Arizona, right? So now you can see that for Arizona, right, there's only one company in Arizona, but it does not have excessive unpaid orders. So in that case, I should not be displaying this text element down here, right? It doesn't make sense to show it. So somehow I have to make the display of this text element conditional on whether, in fact, there is a company displayed in the table with excessive unpaid orders. So those are the basic things that I'm going to script in this dashboard. Now, one thing that I have to point out is that pardon me, my intention here is not to show you cases where you absolutely need to use script. In fact, probably none of these, probably in most of these cases, you don't need to use script. In other words, you could find a way to do it without script. Probably not that last one that I showed you, and probably not setting these text elements. You can't do that, but the stuff that I'm going to show you with the chart, you could probably find ways to do it without script. There are alternatives. And in many cases, those alternatives might be better than using script. For example, in this case, where we're going to switch between the table and the chart by controlling the visibility of the chart and the table, that's an approach, and it uses script. But there's also another approach which might be easier, which is the so-called tabbed interface. And after we do the example, I'll show you how you would do it with the tabbed interface. Very easy. And it would achieve the same effect, and it's probably better to do it that way than with script. But my point here is to show you the types of things that you can do with script. However, in general, if you find another way, if there's another way that achieves the same thing without script, generally you should probably use that method, because it's probably going to be more efficient, right? Because it doesn't require the the dashboard to process script, right? That obviously processing script is something that takes some finite amount of time. Every time the dashboard is redrawn, all the scripts have to execute, and then the actions required by the scripts it need to be executed. So script does take time. So if you can do things without script, it's better. Also from a just from a maintainability standpoint, right? You're designing this dashboard, but you always have to think that down the road, somebody else might need to modify the dashboard, and you want to have pity on that person. You don't want to necessarily create a dashboard that's just oozing script, and then this poor person comes along and they're tasked with updating this dashboard, and every component has a script on it, and it's very complex, and this component controls that component via script, and that component controls another component via script, and that poor person is going to have to spend 3 weeks trying to figure out how the dashboard actually works. That's probably something you want to avoid. So anyway, my point here is that I just want to show you the mechanics of where you can set script and the type of things that you can do with script, and then I leave it to your better judgment if and when you want to use script in a dashboard. Okay, so let's begin. So the first thing is this chart over here. I want to let the user choose the measure that they see on the chart, right? So right now it's displaying total, and as you can see, when I make these selections from this radio button, the chart does not change because I didn't hook it up. Now, in fact, for this, we don't need script, at least to change the measure on the chart. All you need to do is just use make the property dynamic, the y-axis property dynamic. So let's do that really quick. And I'm pretty sure that we've done this in a previous webinar also. We've probably looked at dynamic properties. So I'm going to press the edit button for the chart to open up the chart editor in the left panel. And all I need to do here is, rather than having the total field set on the y-axis here, all I need to do is make this dynamic by switching the pop-up here. There's a little mystery pop-up button here, and I'll just switch that from value to variable. And what that will do is it will allow the y-axis to be set by one of the input components, by one of these form components in the dashboard. And you can see, if you open this list, you can see that there are three form components in the dashboard. There's this combo box whose name is view. There's this radio button whose name is measure, and there's this other radio button whose name is year. Right? So I took care, when I set up this dashboard initially, I took care to give each of these form components a meaningful name, and you can see that that helps me out here because it's clear which one I need to select. I want this measure radio button to set the field on the y-axis. And so let's test it out. All right, so if I select total, I see total. If I select quantity, I see quantity purchased on the y-axis. And if I select discount, I see discount, sum of discount. All right, so that works, and again, there's no script required there. For some reason, my dashboard is running a bit slow. I must have some process running in the background, or maybe just the GoToWebinar seems to have slowed it down. So I apologize. I hope you can see it updating. So what's the problem here? Why do I need any script at all? Well, the reason that I want to use some script here is that when I select the discount, right, so then I'm getting the aggregated discounts category by category, which is great, but it's summing them up, and that doesn't really make that much sense, right? So the discount values are percentages, so for a given order, there might be a 1% discount or a 5% discount or something. What this is doing, the way that I have it right now, is that for each category, for all the orders in a category, it's adding those numbers together. So I get these, crazy numbers like 500%, 1,000%. What does that mean? That doesn't mean a lot to me. What I'd probably prefer to see in this case is what's the average discount for a given category. I'd like to know, for the category of hardware, what is the average discount, and is it more or less than, let's say, the average discount given for products in the games category. So what I want to do here is I want to automatically change the aggregation method for the discount option, right? Total and quantity are fine when the user selects total or when the user selects quantity, right? So I can sum those values up. It makes sense in both cases to sum those. So I don't have a problem there, but I would like to adjust the aggregation method when the user selects discount. So the way we're going to do this is by using some script on a property. So this is an example of property script. let's see how to do it. So the first thing I need to do is I need to find the property that I want to set. And the property in this case is the aggregate property. So to find that, I go to the measure. Here's the measure on the y-axis. I press the edit measure button. Right, and there's this property here called aggregate or aggregate. And this is where you would set the method that's used to aggregate the values on the chart. Right? And you can see that by default, it's always set to sum. So this is what I need to modify. But of course, I don't just want to set this to average, because if I set it to average as a fixed aggregate property, then all of the measures will be averaged, right? So then total and quantity will be averaged along with the discount. So that doesn't help me. What I need to do is I need to somehow detect what the user selected in this radio button and then set the aggregate property appropriately. So what I'll do here is from the mystery pop-up button on the right side here, I'm not going to select variable because I don't have a variable. I don't have any form component that's going to that I can use to set that aggregate property. Although of course I could do that. I could add a radio button or a combo box, and the user would select either sum or average. That would be an approach, but the approach that we're going to do here is a little bit more elegant, because then we don't have to add, we don't have to add that other form element and complicate the dashboard interface even more than it is. So what I'll do is I'll select expression, press the edit button here, and then I'm going to write a little script here. And again, this is a property script because the script is setting a particular property. The script is attached to the property, the aggregate property in this case. And what I want to do is I want to detect what the user selected from the radio button. And there are a couple ways to do that. You can either do that by going to the component folder here, and you can find the name of that component, which was measure. I think that's what it was, yeah, measure. Right, and in that measure folder, you can find all the properties of that radio button, and among those properties, there is a property called selected object, right? So that will give you the value that the user selected. So that's one way to find out in a script what the user selected from that component. The easier way, though, I think, is that you'll also find it in the parameter folder. So if you go to parameter, there's something called measure, right? Which is, again, is the name of that radio button. And so that's available. You can click on it there, and it inserts the syntax parameter.measure that will give you the value that the user selected. Right, so that's, I think the easier way to do it. And of course, you could also just type parameter.measure and the autocomplete will help. So what I want to do here is I just want to do a little test and say if parameter.measure, again, the value that the user selected here, is equal to discount, then the value that I want to return for the aggregate, again, this is a script on the property, so I have to return a valid property value. So the value that I want to return for this property is average. Right? It's just the string average. And then I'll say else. Otherwise, I'll return sum. I'll copy this into the chat box in case it's too small. I know that sometimes these things are too small for people to see, so I'll just copy it in here. Okay, so that should pop up in the chat box. So again, it's just testing if the user selected here the value discount, right? Then I want to return as the aggregate property the string average, right? Because that's the aggregation method that I want to use in that case. Otherwise, I'll return sum. Otherwise, of course, captures the other two cases when the user selects either total or quantity. So that's my my little script. Should be pretty simple. So I'll press OK, press apply, okay, and then I'll test it out. So if I select total, I see sum total. That's good. If I select quantity, I see some quantity purchased. That's good. In case you're wondering why it says quantity purchased here and not just quantity, that's because when I set up the radio button, I changed the label, right? So although the label in the radio button says quantity, that's the text that you see here, the actual value that's submitted is the name of the field, which is quantity purchased. In case you're wondering how to do that, if you open up the radio button properties, right, there's the embedded list here for the radio button. Right, and so you can see that here I changed the label. Right, it was originally quantity purchased, like the value, and I just took off the second word. Right, so that's why there's that difference. And then finally, if I select discount here, what I should see is that I get the average discount. right? So that makes much more sense. Now I can look at the different categories and I can see, for example, that graphics has the highest average discount overall, and I can also look at it broken out by year and so on. Okay, so that's our first example of script, and that's an example of property script. We're adding script to a particular property, in this case the aggregate property. Okay, well let's move along, and let's take a look at the next kind of script that we can do, which is component script. Right, so we can also add script to not only to a individual property, but to a component as a whole. For example, we can add script to the chart, and we can add script to this table. And to illustrate this, we're going to we want to wire up this combo box here so that the user can select whether they see the table or the chart. Right. Of course, we could also add an option here to see both, but in this case, we'll keep it simple, and we'll just force the user to choose table or chart. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing that you usually want to do with any form component is make sure it has a meaningful name, and I may have already given this one a meaningful name, but I'll just double check. So I'll go to Properties for that combo box, and I can see that I already did. It was originally called Combo Box 1 or something like that, and I changed it to View, right? Because I want to choose the view that the user is going to see. Okay, so I already did that, so that's fine. So basically the script that I want to write here is I want to say, I want to add a component script to the chart that says if the combo box value, the value selected in the combo box is table, then hide the chart, otherwise show the chart. Right, so that's the script that I want to write. So let's give it a try. So right click on the chart, select Properties, right, and this is how you add a component script. Not sure why this dialog box is so large, but anyway, there is a script tab at the top, and every component has a script tab, right? And the script that I'm going to write is very simple. I know that if I look at this list of components, you can see that there's a component here called View, right? That's that's that combo box. And again, that component has a property called selected object. That will give me the value that the user selected. It also has a property called selected label that will give me the label that the user selected. In this case, they should be the same. I believe I set it up. The labels and the values are the same. But here again, it's also listed, the combo box is also listed in the parameter folder. So there's a parameter.view, right? So I can access it there also. So if I click on that, that inserts the syntax parameter.view, and then I can just do a test. If parameter.view, again, that's the value that the user selects in that combo box, if that's equal to table, I apologize for the lag. It seems doesn't seem to be a GoToWebinar for some reason. The script editor is lagging. So if the user selects value table, then what I want to do for the chart is I want to set the chart to be invisible, right? So what I'll do is there's a property called visible. If you just start typing it, you'll see that it auto-completes. If you didn't happen to know that, what you could do is you could look for the chart component, which is called category chart. Again, I gave it a meaningful name. Category chart, you could look through the many properties that charts have, and if you scrolled all the way down, you would see that it's probably near the end. Right, there's a property of the chart called visible. So if you're not sure what properties are available, by all means use the list over here, and it'll show you what properties are available. If you know that there is a visible property, of course, you could just start typing and rely on the autocomplete. So if the user selects table from the combo box over there, then I want to set visible to false. And then I'll do else visible equals true. Okay, so that's a very simple script that I'm putting on the chart. Basically just says if the user from this combo box selects table, then hide the chart, otherwise show the chart. Right, and you'll notice that I don't, for the visible property here, I don't need to qualify it with the name of the chart, although I could, right? So instead of visible, I could put, right? If I click on that property, the visible property of the chart, you'll notice that it inserts the fully qualified name, category chart.visible. That would also work, but because writing this script on the chart itself, it's understood that the visible property, if it's used without reference to a particular component, it's understood that this is the visible property of the chart that I'm setting. I'm going to copy this and I'll paste it both into the chat box, and I'm also going to use it for the table here. So let me just, in case anybody had trouble seeing it, it's in the chat box. And I want to use the same script on the table here, except that I just want to reverse the condition, right? So I'm going to right click on the cross tab here, select properties, and of course the cross tab also has a script tab. All right, I'm just going to paste that script right in here, and I'm just going to reverse this, right? So if the user selects table, then I want visible to be true for the table, otherwise false. Right? So it's just the exact same script as the chart. I just reversed the property settings, right? So when the chart is hidden, the table is visible, and when the table is hidden, the chart is visible. Press OK. Okay, so let's test it out in the preview, just make sure that it works. So I'm going to save that. Right, and so basically what I did is I created two component scripts, one component script on the chart, one component script on the table, and each of them reference that combo box. So I'm going to preview the dashboard. It's easier to see visibility in the preview. That's why I'm previewing it. Although you'll notice that in the design view, you can see that it's slightly grayed out, so that's encouraging, but it's easier to see here. So if I select table, right, there's the table. If I select chart, there's the chart, right? So that works. Now what I can do here, you may wonder, well, what's the advantage of that? I didn't save any space at all. But what I could do, now that I know that only one of those is visible at a time, I can put one of those components right on top of the other. So I can drag the table, for example, I'll drag it right up into the same space where the chart is, and that will give me an option here, either move component or place into tabbed interface. Now, I don't want to use the tabbed interface, but the fact that I'm seeing it there is very suggestive, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But in this case, I just want to do move component here, which means I just want to throw that table right up on top of the chart and overlap them. Now that looks horrible, except for the fact that I know that only one of these is going to be visible at a time, right? So I'm not worried about the fact that it looks all jumbled up. What I can do is I'll go back and refresh the preview. And there's the table. I can switch the chart, right? There's the chart, table, right? So I can go back and forth between the table and the chart. All right, so that's, and then of course I could make each of them bigger. I can make the table bigger so it fills up this space, and I can make the chart bigger so it fills the full space, and so on. All right, so that's an example of using component script. Now, a few things to say about this. I'm going to move them back out of that position. The first thing to say is that I could have done the very similar thing in another way by using property script, because in fact, if you look at these components, right, if you go into the properties, every component has a visible property, right? And that visible property can actually be set, the same way that any property can. Well, I should say that most properties can be set either as a static value or using a variable or using an expression. So, so what I could have done is I could have put that script over here. I could have switched this to expression, and then I could have used a very similar script that would have returned either a value of show or a value of hide for the visible property, right? So that I could have done that instead of doing it as a component script. I could have done it as, under the script tab, I could have done it as a property script. I could have also done that as an onRefresh script, which we'll see more about. The onRefresh script is a dashboard level script that executes whenever a dashboard is refreshed. I could have put that script there as well, and that would have allowed me to create just a single script rather than two individual scripts. And it's something worth thinking about when you're doing scripting, is how many different places are you adding script into. In this case, we added script both on the chart and on the cross tab. If you could achieve the same result by using a single script, a single onRefresh script, which you would put, as we'll see in a moment, you'd go to the options button, and there's a script tab in the view sheet options, right? And there's a on refresh script there, if you could have added just a single script here, perhaps that might have been better. The single script would have done the same thing, right? It would have said, if the user selects table, then set the visibility property of the chart to false and set the visibility property of the table to true, else, the other way around, right? So it would have been fundamentally the same script, but it would have been just a single script that would have controlled the visibility of both the table and the chart. In this case, that might have been preferable just for maintainability reasons, right? So down the road, somebody, different developer comes along and takes over maintenance of this dashboard. It's much easier for them to look at one script than to kind of have to patrol around the whole dashboard and find which components have scripts on them and so on. That's made slightly easier, by the way, by the asterisk that appears on a scripted component. You'll notice that on the chart and on the table, there's this asterisk up there, and if you click on it, it will actually open the script editor. But that's your clue. If you're looking at a dashboard and you see components that have that asterisk, that's your clue that the component has script on it. So that helps a little bit, but still, if you can write one script rather than 2 or 10, probably better just to write one. Okay, now there's one other thing to say about this, which is that I could have really avoided this script entirely just by using the tabbed interface, right? So if that was my whole goal, was just to have these two components kind of reside in the same area of the dashboard, what I might have chosen to do would simply be to drag the table up on top of the chart, like we did just a moment ago, but just select that second option, right? Place component into tabbed interface, press OK. Right. And now I probably want to remove that script because it's going to be hiding. Actually, I can still see it in the design view. If I do a preview, one of the components will be hidden, so it'll look strange. But basically, the tabbed interface gives me essentially what I wanted, right? It gives me the ability to switch back and forth between the table and the chart, right? And in this case, there is no script, right? I don't need any script to do a tabbed interface, right? So there's the chart. I can switch over to the table, back and forth. And so that would be a solution to this this problem of combining the chart and the table into the same space that requires no script, right? And so all other things being equal, that would be the better solution. But of course, when you're doing your own dashboard design, in most cases, all other things are not equal, and there may be particular reasons why you need to do something like that using script, and why this approach might not be adequate for your particular case. So it's important to know both approaches, solving something like that using tabbed interface and also addressing something like that using script. Okay, so I'm going to remove the tabbed interface and just put this back where it was. Okay, and so I'll just leave it like this for now. Why is that? Seems to be overlapping. I guess I must have moved the chart at some point. Okay, so so there's a few examples of adding script to a dashboard. So far we've seen adding property script, we've seen adding component script that you attach to the script tab of a particular component. And we've seen that there are definitely cases where you can handle it either way. You can achieve the same effect either using property script or using component script. In many cases, using property script is easier. It's easier to write property script in many cases, and it's easier for for people to see that that a property has been scripted. But again, the particular circumstances may dictate which is better. Let's move on. So we've covered this, we've covered that. Let's move on to this radio button over here, right? And this is going to get us into an example of dashboard level script, or the onRefresh script, right? So what's going on here? So basically over here, I want the user to select whether they're going to see data from 2014 in the chart and the table, 2015, 2016, or all the data. Right. Now, before we go ahead and hook this up so that it works, it's important to point out that there are many different approaches that I could use to let the user filter the chart and the table. So for those of you who are possibly new to dashboards, I don't want you to think that this has got to be your first approach. Of course, the easiest approach to filtering dates is to use a range slider, which you can get simply by finding the date field, right? The date field in our data set is this date field here. If I want the user to be able to filter, the chart and the table on dates, I would just drag that date field into the dashboard, and that gives me a range slider, right? This is the default method for filtering dates, right? And you could, whoops, I meant to drag the handle, and so right, the user can select a range of dates, right, just by dragging around, and that filters the chart and filters the table. So in 99% of the cases, that's what you want to do. That's the easiest to use, probably the most probably yields the best performance, and so it's that's the kind of default way to filter dates. There are other ways to filter dates as well. I mean, if you don't want to use a range slider, for example, let's say that you wanted the user to choose from a list like this, a list of dates, to make a discrete choice. So in that case, the range slider might not be the best option. In that case, you could still do without scripting a component like this. You could create, for example, a calculated field here that would yield the date, right? So I could create, although there is no such field right now in the data set, I could create a new field that just gives me the date, the year of the date, and then I could create a selection component based on that. So just to quickly illustrate that, right, I would select little slower. Right click on the data set, select new calculated field. This is another area, of course, where you can do scripting, although I'm not really going into it now. I think we may have done a webinar on calculated fields actually, but in any case, what I want to do is I want to create a new field. I'll just call it year, for example. I'm selecting the detail option, right, because I want to do this computation, the calculated field. I want to calculate it on the values in that original date field there. So that's why I select detail. Press OK. And then I could use a very simple script, just like calc.year. Right, there's a property, a JavaScript function called calc.year, and I should switch this to script if I'm using JavaScript, right? And so if you didn't know that, you could, of course, you could scroll through all these different properties, and somewhere perhaps under date you might find, actually it wouldn't be under date, it would be under calc. Right, so somewhere in here there should be a calc. So calc, date, time. All right, so if you scroll around, you'll find that there is a property in there called year, calc.year. That's what I'm using, and basically I'm just going to give that function, I'll just give it the date field. Right, and so basically what this function will do, this is not really a script, dashboard script per se. This is a calculated field. It's kind of a slightly different thing, but anyway, if you haven't seen this before, it's worth knowing about that you can create calculated fields that get that become part of the data set, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm taking the existing date field that's part of the data set, and I'm just operating on it with the calc.year function, and it will just return the year part of that date. Right. So I press OK, and I just have to wait a second because it's running slow. Right, and so what that does is it then creates this calculated field called year, which is now a part of my data set, and it just contains the year part of the existing date field. And so what I can do then is I could just use that. Right, if I just wanted the user to select from a set of years, right? So I'm just using that year calculated field. I can just drag that into the dashboard. That gives me a selection list, same as any other dimension that I would drag into the dashboard. Any other, string field that I drag in gives me a selection list like this. And then I could, the user could just select the year, for example, 2014, and just as before, this would filter the entire data set. So if the user selects 2014, then they see just 2014 in the chart and in the table. Right. So that's another approach. So the reason I'm telling you all this is just that I don't want you to think that your only approach to doing something like this is to write a script and that it's very complicated. In fact, there's easier ways to do it, but you should also know how you could do it using script. So let's take a look at this. So now to return to the example the script example. So we've got this radio button here. I want the user to select one of these options, and then I want the chart and the table to be filtered. So what I'll do is I'll add a condition to the chart and the table. Right. So right-click on the chart, and I'll select condition. And then I'm going to write a parameterized condition, and it'll look like this. The condition is date is between. Right, and of course you can enter a fixed start date and a fixed end date, but that's not what I want to do here, because I want the user to be able to choose that. And so what I'll do is I'll select variable for both the start date and end date, variable and variable. Now, if you pop open those, it's actually remembering the names that I entered when I was testing this out earlier. So I just deleted those. So I set both the start date and the end date to variable, and you'll notice if you open those menus, it will show me a list of the input components that are currently in the dashboard, right? These three: the view and measure and year. However, I can't choose one of these because, in particular, obviously, choosing this one or that one wouldn't make any sense. But I can't even choose the year radio button because this is just giving me a string. It's just giving me the string 2014. It's not a date, right? So when you're doing a date condition, right, the value that goes on this side, on the right side for the start date and the end date, needs to be an actual date, right? This is just the string, 2014. It doesn't know what that means. So I can't simply select. I can't do like this. I can't simply select that input component. So what I'll do instead is I'll create my own variable names called start date and end date. Right, start date and end date. I'm just typing these in. Right, these are just arbitrary variable names, and then press modify. Right, and so what I've done is I've created a parameterized condition, and it's going to require two parameters, start date and end date, and right now those are not being supplied from anywhere. Right, this radio button is not supplying a start date and an end date. As I mentioned, it's just the user's just selecting a string value, one of these string values. So I'm going to have to do something else to supply the start date and end date that will allow this condition to be applied. Right, so we'll figure out in a moment how to do that. So I hope everybody understands I'm just setting up a parameterized condition with parameters start date and end date, and then I press OK. Now, I actually expected to be prompted for that, but it didn't. That's kind of strange. It didn't prompt me for the start date and end date. I wonder if I turned off. Okay. I was expecting to be prompted, but in any case, so this doesn't work yet, right? Because I have not in any way associated the radio button with the chart, but I now have this parameterized condition on the chart. Let's see if I preview it, if it will prompt me. I'm previewing the dashboard. Still doesn't prompt me for those parameters. Okay, in any event, yeah. So you can see that the radio button here isn't actually having any effect on the chart, right? Although I do have that parameterized condition on the chart, the condition itself is not being applied because no values have been supplied for start date and end date for those parameters. Okay, so what do I need to do? What I need to do is I need to set up a script that will find out what value the user selected here, and we'll use it to set the start date and the end date of those the parameters that I use in the script. And what I'll do is I'll put that script, going back to the design view, I'll put that script at the dashboard level in the onRefresh handler. So I click the options button up at the top, go to the script tab, right? And there are two dashboard level scripts. There's an onInit script and an onRefresh script. OnInit runs only once when the dashboard initially loads. OnRefresh runs every time the dashboard refreshes, which it does whenever the user makes some kind of input selection. For example, when the user interacts with a form element like this, or when the user makes a selection from a filtering component, the dashboard refreshes and this onRefresh script re-executes. Right? So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to set the start date and end date parameters based on what the what the user specified here. Okay, so let's see how we're going to do this. So first of all, how do I access the start date and the end date parameters? Well, I should be able to find those in the parameters list here, right? So if I look under parameter, scroll down, right? So here's end date and here's start date, right? So I can just click on the start date and it inserts the syntax parameter.startDate. Great. Right, so that's how I can access that parameter. And what I want to do is I want to set that to an actual date, which in this case is the beginning, the first day of the year that the user selects. So the way that I can do that is just like this. I can use the date constructor by typing new date. Right, so this is this is one way to create a new date object. Just type the keyword new and then capital D date, and that there's a number of different ways that you can enter values here, but the simplest way is just year, month, and day, right? So in this case, what I want to do for the year, I want to create a new date with the year that the user selects here, right? So I need to access the value that the user specified, right? So so that's available to me also from the parameter list, right? It's given to me by parameter.year. Right, year being the name of this radio button, right? This radio button component is called year. So parameter.year, right, gives me the value that the user selected in that radio button, right? So that's the year, and then the month of the start date is January, which is index 0. Months are indexed from 0, and then day number 1, right? So year, comma, month, comma, day, right? So if I want the first day of the year that the user selected, it's going to be parameter.year, that's the actual year that the user selected, comma 0 is January, comma 1 is the first day. And I'll do the same thing for the end date, right? So I'm going to do a parameter.endDate equals new date. I'll copy this into the chat box when I'm all done. And then again, parameter.year, here I'm just using the autocomplete, comma, now what, for the end date, it's going to be the end of that year, right? The end of the year that the user selected, so that's December, index 11, again, counting from 0, and 31, December 31st. Okay, so so that's fine. Now we'll see that there's a problem here, so I'll have to come back into the script in a moment, and the problem is, oh, there's a question. Sorry, I didn't see that pop up. Oh, there's a question. Will I be making this view sheet available for download after today's session? I could. Why don't you just, if anybody else wants this view sheet, why don't you just send me an email, david.fass@inetsoft.com. I don't have a standard mechanism for posting this anywhere. So so just if you want it, let me know, and I'll I can put it in a jar file and send it over if you want to look at it later. Sure. Okay, so so we'll see in a moment what the problem is here, but I'll just copy this into the chat box just in case anybody's squinting their eyes and trying to see what's going on here. So again, what this should do is it should set the start date and the end date parameters based on the year that the user selects here. And of course, once those start date and end date parameters are set, then the condition that I put on the chart should be effective, right? Because it will be a parameterized condition, and the start date and end date will be set by the onRefresh handler here, so everything should be good to go, except for one thing, which we'll see in a second. So I'm going to press OK. Okay, and now I'm going to try it out. Now you can see that the chart just blanked out because I have the all options selected, and I'll show you why that's happening in a moment, but let's try the other options. If I select 2014 and wait a minute, right, so the chart comes back filtered to give me just 2014 data. Press 2015, again, after a moment, I get 2015 data, and likewise 2016. Right, so the script works, and again, basically what it's doing is I'm using the onRefresh script to find out what the user selected here, and to actually construct the actual start date and end date, which are being used then by the condition on the chart. Right, and if I want this crosstab also to have the same condition, right, which makes sense because the crosstab is displaying the same data as the chart. So if I want to filter the chart, I'd probably also want to filter the crosstab. It's exactly the same. I just need the same condition set up here. So I'll just right-click on the crosstab, go to condition, and just create the very same condition that date is between parameter start date and end date. It remembers that from before. So date is between, start date and end date. Again, these values, these variables are getting their values from the onRefresh script, right? So I can just create that condition, right? So the very same variables are being used now in the chart condition and in the table condition. That's fine. And so now when I make my choices here, right, I should see both the chart and the table displaying just the year that I selected. Now, what about the all option here? Why does that break? Right, so if I select all, you can see that both of those, both the chart and the table are now blank. That's because the start date and the end date are not being set. And it's obvious if you look at, well, first of all, if you look at what's getting submitted when the user selects all, if we go into the properties for that radio button and take a look at the embedded list, right, so you can see when the user selects one of these years, the actual string, representing the year gets submitted, so that's fine. When the user selects all here, a null value gets submitted. There's no corresponding value. That's just the way that I set it up. I could have put all here, but I just left it blank. And if you leave it blank, then a null value gets submitted. But whatever the case is, whether you submit the word all or a null value, the script on the onRefresh handler is going to break because you can't create a date from either the word all or from a null value using the method that we used in the onRefresh handler. So somehow we're going to have to handle this case separately, right? In this case, what's being submitted, the way that I set it up, is a null value. So I'm going to have to catch that null value and do something different in that case. So let me get out of here, and I'll go back to the onRefresh script. And so what I want to do here is I want to detect something like this. If I could do is there's a function called isNull, right? So if isNull and then parameter.year, right? So in other words, if the parameter.year again is the right, that refers to the value that the user selected in this radio button. So if that value happens to be null, then what do I want to do in that case? Well, what I'd like to do in that case is set the start date and the end date to null as well. Because I know that if I do that, if I set the start date variable and the end date variable to null, then the condition cannot be applied to the chart and the table because it won't have values for start date and end date. And so that will cause the condition to be dropped, and I'll see all the data. Right, so that's a slick way to handle this. Of course, another way to handle it would be that if the value is null, in other words, if the user had selected all, which the way that I set it up submits a value null, a null value. Another way to handle it would be then just to set the start date way back, 1970 or something, and set the end date way in the future. And of course, that's another way to make sure that you're capturing all the all possible data. But here, it's easier just to do, I'm just going to copy this. And just, flesh out this a little bit. And so here I want to do null and null. Okay, so again, basically what I'm doing is I'm just detecting if the user submitted a null value from this radio button, which would correspond to a selection of all, the way that I set it up. So if the user did do that, if they submitted a null value by selecting all, then I'm setting the start date and the end date variables to null as well, which means that the condition on the table and the chart will be dropped. Otherwise, it's doing what we did before, which is it's creating the start date and end date, just the way that we had it. So I'll copy that full script into the chat box. And we'll just quickly test it out as we kind of get to the end of our time here. Try to do one or two more things. So we'll just test this out. All right, so you can see now that, hopefully if I select an individual year, everything still works because I didn't change that part. But if the user selects all, right, then they see all the data because the start date and end date are also being set to null, and that causes the condition on the chart and the table to be dropped, right, to be ignored. Okay, so so far so good. Let's see what else we can do here. in terms of scripting. So we did that, we did that, we did that. Let's move up to the top here, and I'll just try to do the last few things pretty quickly and try to wrap up pretty close to noon. So I want this text element to say something like welcome back David, or whatever the username is, right? So how do I do that? I can write a very simple script on the text element, right? So I'll right click on this text element, select properties, and this is another example of a component script, right? So like I said, every component has the script tab. Whoops. This is the thing, get messages popping up. Okay, so there's the script tab for the text component. And what I want to do is I want to set the text to what I currently have, and then append to that the name of the currently logged in user. So the way that I would do this is I would say that I want the text property, right? A text element has a text property. Again, how would you know that? Well, what you could do is you could find that text component, which is called, what is that text component? It's text2, right? So I didn't bother to give that one a good name, but you can see that any text component has a text property. Right there it is. So I happen to know that, so I just type text equals text. And I want to, text equals text means that the text that I want there is the current text that's already there, and then I want to concatenate to that using the plus, the JavaScript plus operator. I want to concatenate to that the name of the currently logged in user. And I actually have that also. If I close this and I scroll down to the parameter list, right, among the built-in parameters is a parameter called _user_, right? And if you click on that, it inserts the syntax parameter._user_. That's the username of the currently logged in user. And that's how you would access that username within a dashboard, right? So if I do this, press OK, right, you can see now that it says, welcome back anonymous, right? Why am I called anonymous? Because currently I'm running with security turned off. So when you run a server with security turned off, there's only one user, right? It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're using the server, if you're, logging in with security turned off, you're not actually even logging in. Your name is anonymous. That's just the way it works with security turned off. So that's why it says welcome back anonymous. If I were to turn security on, and I'm not going to do that now because that would cost another 2 minutes, that I'd rather do something else. But if I were to turn security on and I were to log in, for example, as administrator, then it would say welcome back admin. If I were to log in as, Dave, it would say welcome back Dave, assuming that that's my actual username. All right, so that's how you can access user information, both username and groups and roles, in a dashboard. Now there is a simpler way, just to quickly show you. There's a simpler way to write this script. This kind of construction right here, where you take an existing value and concatenate it to a previous value. There's a special syntax for this, which is plus equals. Right. So the same script, this does the same thing. Text plus equals, and then parameter._user_. This is it's just a shorthand for text equals text plus. Right. So that's just whoever designed JavaScript, came up with that shorthand. Actually, I think probably whoever designed some much earlier language came up with that shorthand. Probably C, or whatever. Anyway, press OK, and it's the same result. Let's move over here. And over here, I want the current date. I want it to say generated on, and then I want to insert the current date, right? So how would I do that? Similar process. So again, I'll right-click, go to Properties, pardon me. For the text element, go to the Script tab, and here again, I'll do text plus equals. And now which again means that I want to take the text that's currently there and concatenate something to it and then return the result into the text property of the text element. In this case, there's a property called calc.today, which should suffice. Right, calc.today gives me today's date. Now it gives it to me without any formatting, which might pose a problem, so we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But that property does give me today's date. Again, if you didn't happen to know about that, you could probably guess that there is such a property, and you could search through the documentation, or you could just come down here to calc and kind of browse through the date functions, and you'd probably find it in here as well, towards the end somewhere. Anyway, there is such a property, so let's see what that does. All right. And actually, that doesn't come out looking half bad. It seems like, well, let's see. Does it or doesn't it? Oh yeah, it does. It does come out looking half bad. I just had the text element too. So right, so it comes out both with the date and the time. So that might not be desirable. That's a little bit overkill. So what I might choose to do then is to format the date in a particular way, which I can also do in script. So I'll just go back into that script, and I feel like there should have been a space here. I forgot to add. Oh, now it becomes difficult. All right, I'll just leave it like it was. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to first of all add a space following the initial text, and a space, and then I want to use, there's a property called format date, a function called format date. All right, so I'm going to use that, and I'm going to give that today's date given by calc.today, and then I'll format it in a particular way, such as the month dash the day, so the 3-letter month dash 2-digit day dash 4-digit year. Right, I'll copy this into the chat box in just a moment. So so this should do it. Let's just see if that, right, so that gives me a much nicer looking date. Right, so that's how you would format a value that's a date value that's generated by calc.today. So let me, I'll just copy that script into the chat box in case anybody needs to take a look at that. Okay, so that's in the chat box. Okay, so let's just hit the last two things. I know that I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to go, I'll go really fast. For those of you who need to sign off, sorry that I went a little over time, but I'll just finish the last two things that I wanted to show you, and those who need to sign off, you can always catch it on the video. So the second to last thing is that, so now we've got these things set up at the top. What I want to do is I want this bottom text element to display the top customer. Now the top customer is the customer in the top row over here. Now the reason that's always the case, again, is because of the way that I set up the crosstab. So if I open the crosstab editor, right, and I click on that company field that's used on the row header, it's sorted in descending order, right? Now I don't have to do that, but you know, letting the table take care of the sorting makes my script much easier, because then all I need to do in my script is I just need to find out what company is listed in this top left cell, right? And that's very easy. So what I'll do is I'll write a script on this text element. So right click on the text element, go to properties, right? And here I'm going to write a script, and my script is going to be something like text equals, right? And in this case, I'm actually going to write the static text as well, rather than just borrow it from the text in the text element. There's a reason for that, but I'm not going to go into it right now. So the text that I want to appear here is top customer is, and then concatenate that static text with the value, the top company that appears at the top of this list. Now the way that I can do that is I can look into the table by using the table property of the crosstab. So the name of this crosstab, this one over here, is called company crosstab, right? And if I so if I open up that component, company crosstab, what I'll see is that in there somewhere, way down the list of properties, is a property called table. Okay, so I'm going to click on that, and you can see that the table property is a 2-dimensional array. It takes 2 indexes, and it will give me back, you know, whatever value is in the cell specified by those indexes. So the first index is the row, and I'm going to enter 1, right? Because although the row indexing is from 0, the 0th row is actually the column header row, the one that I'm pointing at here. So I don't want that row, so I'm going to go to the second row, which is index 1. Right, I want the value in that row and in the first column, which is index 0. So row index 1, column index 0 will give me the value in basically the first data value in the first column. Right, so I'll copy this script into the chat box, and we'll just verify that that works. Okay, so you can see text customer, sorry, what did I type? Text customer? Did I assume that I had a typo there. Yes, I did. Okay, so that's, my brain was thinking about text. Top customer. Yeah, and I should also have a space over here. Okay, so now it says, right, top customer is Eastern data, and that's true, but depending on the state that I select, it'll probably be something else. So if I select, for example, Florida, right, now it says top customer is fast transportation. Of course, top customer is also bottom customer in that case because there's only one customer, but if I were to select some other state that had more customers, maybe New York has more customers, right, well, here again, it's Eastern data. But so anyway, you can see that whatever selection I make in the state selection list, right, the text element is picking off the value that appears in the first row, first column, and adding it into this text element. So that's another example of script, but in this case, the script is accessing data within an existing table. Okay, last thing that I'll talk about, and then I'll take any questions and let you guys go. Last thing is this thing down here. Basically what I want to do is I've got this text element that I already added. I want to hide it if there is no highlight in the percent unpaid. So in other words, if no row has a highlight on it, then I want to hide this text element down here. Otherwise, I want to show it. Now there's a property called highlighted that allows you to do that. The one thing that you need to know in order to use that property, although it'll probably prompt me for it actually, but you need to know the name of the highlight, right? So if I go back to where I set up the highlight, the name of this highlight is greater than 15. So I'm just going to keep that in mind. And then what I'm going to do is go down to the text element, and I'm going to set the visibility of the text element based on whether that highlight is appearing in the table or not. So I could do this, I guess I'll do it as a component property. I could probably also do it as as a component script. I could probably also do it as a property script because there is a visible property, right, for all components, right? So I could try to script this visible property, but in this case, I'll just do it as a component script. And so this is what I'll write. I'll say if, and then the name of the table. So the table is, it's company crosstab, right? And there should be a property in here called highlighted. Right, so here it is. Right, and you can see that it's actually a folder and it lists all the existing highlights, so this makes it easy, right? So if I just click on that, it gives me the whole syntax. So if company crosstab dot highlighted greater than 15, right, that means that if that highlight is in effect, if that highlight is actually being triggered, then what I want to do is I want this text element to be shown, so I'm going to set visible equals true. Else, visible equals false. Okay, so pretty simple. Basically, this is just saying that if that highlight, this so-called greater than 15 highlight is being triggered on the table, then I want the visible property of this text element to be true. I want to show it. Otherwise, I want to hide it. All right, let's see if it works. Press OK. And again, this is probably easiest to see in the preview, so I'm going to save this, and I'll do a fresh preview. Often when you're working with script, it's a good idea, rather than just updating the existing preview, to do a fresh preview. That'll make sure that the scripts re-execute. So right now I've got New York selected, and you can see that I see that text element because High Society Investments has high number of unpaid orders. But let me clear out the selection list, and let's see if I can pick a pick a state for which that's not true. Let's say Maryland. No, Maryland also has one. Let's try another one. Let's try Arizona. Okay, Arizona, right? So Arizona has just one company, Folk Mining. You can see it's not carrying a high number of unpaid orders, and because that highlight is not triggered, when I select Arizona, you can see that the text element is hidden. So as I mentioned before that, we could have probably put that script also on the visible property. So just to quickly experiment, and then I'll let you go. If I go back here, I can just to illustrate that there are different ways to do things. Let's say I were to take this out of here. Right, so I took that script out from there, and let's say I go over to the General tab, and let's see if I could just do it as an expression script on the visible property. right? So the script is the same. I'm pasting it back in there. The only thing different is that here, rather than setting visible, right, the visible property, because this script is actually acting on the visible property, which could be either show or hide, here I would return show, right? If the highlight is satisfied, then return show for the visible property, otherwise return hide for the visible property, right? Because those are the valid, there's actually 3 valid options, but in this case, I only want to use show and hide. The other one is something like hide, show on print and export, or hide on print and export. I'm not worried about that one. So basically, if the highlight is applied to the table, then show, otherwise hide. Right, so let's see if that one works as well. Okay, so I see it, if I see, if I have highlights appearing, then I see that text element. If I don't have a highlight, again, was that Arizona that didn't? Right. If I don't have any highlights appearing, then I don't see that text element. So that's an alternative method. Okay, I'm going to stop talking because I feel like you saw a number of different things going on here. Maybe you'll have to digest it a little bit, but fundamentally, just to give you the high level again, go back up. There's essentially 3 different places that you can put script. You can script individual properties, right, like we did for setting the aggregation method on the chart, right? Individual properties have that expression option. Right, this expression option allows you to script individual properties. You can add script also to components, right? So that's using the script tab of the individual component. And you can add script at the dashboard level. I see there's a question. I'm just going to finish my sentence. Sorry. You can add script at the dashboard level by going to the options button and adding script either to the onInit or to the onRefresh handler. So that's 3 different areas for adding script. And then if you want to add a 4th, which I showed you just briefly, is that you can add calculated fields to your data, right? So you can right-click on your data source, select new calculated field, and that, although it doesn't really fall within the discussion of today's class, but that's another way that you can use script within a dashboard to get the data that you want. Okay, let me just see if there's questions. Okay, so there are some questions. For those who need to leave, thanks for joining, and I'll just answer the questions now. Oh, the hide script that I use. So somebody, Pat wants me to copy the hide script. Let me see if I can find that. That was, where did I put that? Over here. So let me do that first. Okay, so here's the hide script. Okay, next question. So that's in the chat box. Can a calendar be, next question is from Jim, can a calendar be set to select today when a dashboard is opened? Calendar component. It's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Let me see. So if I go, let's grab a calendar component. Oh, I have something open here. Can it be set to select today? I don't know if there's a property for that. Perhaps it could be done using script. Yeah, I mean, let's see. A calendar might have a selected object property. Or not. Let's see. Selected object. So calendar does have a selected objects property. It's an array. So let's try to set. Let's see if I were to do this. What if I were just to set that to calc.today? I have to check if it's actually a writable property or not. I'm not sure that it's a writable property. array index out of bounds. Not sure how. Well, that's odd. Okay. Let me see what selected objects does for a calendar. I may have to come back to you on this. It's writable for a calendar. I'll have to look into that. It appears just superficially, although I'd have to play around with it a bit more. But it seems like you could probably use a script to set the current selection of a calendar, so you should be able to set it to today's date using calc.today. Just let me just jot. I can email you after. Let me just jot down a note. Set calendar. Okay, and there was another question. Okay, also Les wants. Okay, we'll email Les also. Okay, let me see. There was one other question. Calendar. Is there a way to trigger on refresh? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that there's an automatic way, or rather a manual way to trigger on refresh. I would have to. I could search the documentation, but usually it gets triggered. It gets triggered when you need it to be triggered. So let's see. On refresh handler. Yeah, I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't know that there's a way to trigger it manually. It generally triggers in response to any user input. So yeah, I'll get back to you on that as well. Okay. Any other questions? Everybody. It's more questions than I usually get, so that's good. Okay, so I will get back to you guys with the answers. I hope today. So I guess if there's no more questions, then I'll just wish everybody a good weekend and see you back hopefully next month. Thanks very much.